Hello again, this is Mark Mitchell. The purpose of today's video is looking at Chapter 3 on Hinduism from our textbook on world religions, and I hope this kind of helps you with the reading a little bit, but going along with what the author has to present in the chapter. The first thing we come across is an opening story, but it's when he is traveling to different parts of the world to experience these religions, and he's in India. And he comes across a travel guide or somebody like that where he strikes up a conversation. And his first exposure to Hindu religion is Lord Ganesha. And I pulled up a few pictures here if you haven't seen that before. But that's a Hindu god, but it has an elephant's head and trunk. So that's kind of unusual but interesting. And so that gives us a little bit of idea of what he's looking at. And as we move to the next slide, we'll get to the Vedic period in just a second, but a little bit about India is the country is big. It has a warm climate, and people live outdoors most of the time. The nation itself is shaped kind of like a diamond, in the form of a diamond. The Ganges is the major river there that enables life to really flourish across much of India. And so a lot of Indians call it Gangama or Mother Ganges. So it is very important, again, for life there. Hinduism is the major religion of India, and it's considered to be one of the oldest world religions on planet Earth. There is no one founder that we can point to. There's no organizational structure that can either defend the religion or help to spread it. And there's no creed, there's no statement of belief to actually stabilize its concepts, its ideas that are considered critical to the belief. Hinduism is known for being polytheistic and worshiping many gods, and so there's really something here for everyone is how it's kind of phrased, and that may be true. Maybe one way to describe the religion in a little bit different way than what I've done already is it could start out as a two-room cottage. But over time, there are different rooms and wings that are added to this original two-room cottage so that it becomes very big and expansive. And maybe that helps to explain the something here for everyone. Now, on this first slide, they talk about the Vedic period, and we want to spend a little bit of time there. But here, it's when we talk about the Vedic period, it's just influences in the country of India that help to shape the culture and the religion. And most of the points on the slide, of course, are really talking about religion. But let's back up just a second. But we're going back, again to 2,000 years before the Common Era, so roughly 4,000 years ago. But the origin of the Vedas and its religion are not exactly known. Back then, one of the common languages that were spoken was Sanskrit, and it's related to Greek and Latin. So with those languages and the cultures that use those languages, a lot of the gods that they had in Greece and Rome eventually made their way to India through people who were traveling and had connections one to another. Now, in Iran, there are also gods that are very similar. And again, mentioning all these because they eventually kind of make their way over to India. Now, there was a group of people from what we call Russia today, about southern Russia, but they made their way into India and also Iran, and they were called the Aryans. And they brought with them their language, their religion, their culture, everything. And so one of the theories about how India did develop with Hinduism is basically called the Aryan invasion theory. But these people from Russia just made their way down to different parts of the world, India and Iran, as we mentioned. Now, another theory of how religion came to India was, again, maybe similar, but it's repeated waves of migration into Pakistan and northern India. And so that all of these really have some kind of, are thought to be theories of how religion developed over a period of time. Now, in addition to what we have on the screen, let me add some more detail. But the Vedas seem to worship mostly male gods, and these male gods really, they control the forces of nature, and they wanted to keep them happy. Now, there's lots of them mentioned in our book, but one, now, some of these names are a little hard to say, but Dias Piter, or Shining Father. Indra was the god of storm and war. Now, the Shining Father was really kind of the same as the Greek god Zeus or the Roman god Jupiter. Agni was the god of fire, and that's related to our English word of ignite. So that's kind of interesting. And those are just a couple. There's more in our book, but Rudra was the god of the winds. Vishnu was a god of cosmic order. And Yama was the god of the afterlife. So they had, just many, many gods for all kinds of things. And again, we mentioned, or let me mention that, again, males kind of took more of the positions that were for religion, and these were passed on down to other males. When they did worship these gods, it took place on outdoor fire altars, and that's kind of common. We'll see that in some other religions, but this fire altar was a square or rectangular space. It was purified with water. Most of the time, if they had food offerings, things like milk or butter and grains were used. And then if it required something more like an animal, that could be used too. And if it was a really big occasion, then you would use a really big animal, such as like a horse. If it was a really special occasion or momentous occasion, something like that would be used. Now, also in these worship services, they would use chants, and of course they would be memorized and part of the ceremony as well. But this is definitely how information was transmitted down from father to son and so on. Okay, so let's proceed to the next slide, and then some of the major literature of Hinduism is featured here. So got several things kind of want to mention to give you a good idea. A lot of these words, if you haven't seen them before, they can be kind of confusing to get clear in your mind. But now we've mentioned how old Hinduism was, and so some of these sacred books that contain their teachings, they are very old as well. Now, the word Vedas does mean knowledge or sacred lore. So related English words that really help us to understand what we're talking about would be vision and then wisdom. And again, they date back at least to 1500 before the Common Era. Now, Hindus believe that holy people of the past that they called rishis, they received the Vedas and then they transmitted them to later generations. The rishis did not create the Vedas, but they simply just helped pass them down to later generations. Now, the Vedas really have four basic parts to them. There's the Rig Veda, and that's basically about hymn or song knowledge, and it has over 1,000 chants to the Aryan gods. The Rig Veda is really the most important of the four. The Yagar Veda is about ceremonial knowledge, and what that means is it contains information that would be used during the sacrifices on the fire altars that we had talked about just a moment ago. The third Veda is the Sama Veda, and this is really the chant knowledge, and it is really an elaboration in this handbook. It is an elaboration of musical Vedic chants. And finally, the Arthava Veda is one that really talks about knowledge from the teacher. The teacher is really, again, the Arthava, but it has prayers and charms to really protect against evil and sickness and things like that. Now, in addition, with the Vedas, the Rig Veda, the most important one, it has an account of the origin of the universe. And according to it, the world came about because of the sacrifice of a super person known as Purusha. So again, they're not sure about the account, and it may be uncertain about some of these things, but at least that origin or the account of the origin of the universe is out there. All right, so the second term on the slide, again, to give you an idea about what Hinduism is about and some of its teachings, is the Upanishads. And again, these go back quite a bit in time. Some would bring up the Axis Age, and again, it goes back to 500 BC, before the Common Era at least. But there, it helps to talk about the civilization that was existing at the time and some of the ways that they lived. But there began to be really a big change. Things were turning in a new direction, and part of that was because of what was occurring in other parts of the world. At this same time, there was the Buddha, there was Confucius, there was the Hebrew prophets, and the Greek philosophers, all living in different parts of the world, but they were having their impact. Now, there were also thoughts of questioning polytheism, and instead of being polytheistic, maybe people were thinking more about being monotheistic. All right, so we get finally to the Upanishads, and they are a collection of about 100 different works, and they really have insights into external and internal reality. Now, the word itself, Upanishad, is really thought to mean sitting near, as in you are sitting near a master and trying to learn. Now, a lot of the techniques that are used to create the spiritual discipline, meditation is really one of the heavy ones. Now, the works that appear in the Upanishads they appear in the form of prose and poetry, but they are also written in a dialogue form. So again, they were produced over a long period of time, and it's really hard to date some of them. And really for Hindus today, there's maybe about a dozen or so that are very popular, that are very wide known. Okay, so again, that gives us a little bit of idea there. And the next item on the PowerPoint is the Mahabharata, and it is a part of the Bhagavad Gita that's mentioned there. But the Mahabharata was written, again, quite a while ago, at least going back to 400 before the Common Era, and about probably up to 400 after in the Common Era, excuse me. So again, about 800 or so years that it took for many, many individuals to write this epic poem. That's what it's known for. But the poem itself tells how the sons of Pandu, they conquered their cousins. Their cousins were called the Kauravas, and they did that with the help of one of the Hindu gods called Krishna. And that's really what it talks quite a bit about. Now, the Bhagavad Gita is also known as the Divine Song, or the Song of the Divine One. That would be a good way to think of it in English. All right, and the Bhagavad Gita is part of what we mentioned earlier with the Mahabharata. All right, the priestly class at the time this was composed, it was really an effort on their part to strike a balance between mysticism, how magic is involved in religion, and everyday life. And again, it was also written in dialogue form, and describes how characters there had to decide on what to do, and whether they were going to use violence to rectify a situation or not, which happens to be a significant situation because Hinduism is one religion that does not approve of violence in any type of form. So there's great care not to harm other people, other animals, or really any living thing. But the story of Arjuna and Krishna is where violence, comes up once again. Even to defend yourself, it's not allowed. And then finally, the last thing on our screen is the Ramayana. And the Ramayana, some of these again hard to pronounce, but really contains another story. And this time it's about Rama and his wife Sita, and they are portrayed as the ideal couple. Now again, these are gods, but Rama's wife Sita was abducted by the demon king of Sri Lanka with the help of the leader of the monkeys, Hanuman. And what happens there is they have to go back to retrieve her, but yet she dies, and Rama is sad, but is at least allowed a little bit more time with his wife. All right, so that gives us just a little bit of detail, and our book, of course, goes into that as well. All right, now there are some important concepts, again, that while you're reading, hopefully you'll be able to pick up on, and just wanted to mention a couple of these, and Brahman is the first one. But again, these are, as the PowerPoint slide has, are concepts in the Upanishads. And these that are book list on the slide, again, are really some of the most important, so they would still be taught today. Now, Brahman literally means to be great, and Brahman is, or the god stood for the cosmic power that was present in any type of Vedic sacrifice or chants. Now, there's one illustration in the text that tries to describe Brahman, but it's something that you can know, but it's kind of hard to experience, and that's when the father is trying to describe Brahman, the supreme spirit, to his son, and he does that by the illustration of salt in a glass of water. If you take a drink, you can taste the salt, but you just looking at it, you can't see it. And that's how the illustration of Brahman can be known. So it's hard to put it into words, but yet it is there. Now it goes on to use some words to describe Brahman. Sat, S-A-T, which is one. Chit, C-H-I-T, is another. And Ananda, A-N-A-N-D-A, is another. So moving on to the second concept is Atman, but it is sometimes referred to as self or soul, and probably the best way to translate it is deepest self. So according to Hindu belief, each person, they have a soul, and really Hindus ask themselves, what really am I? And you're more than just your physical body. Because all these things experience change. And then you would be more than your senses. So, your taste, your thoughts, and your memories. And so they're just really looking at that. And finally, they, at the deepest level of thought for Hindus, they believe that each person is a divine spirit that everything shares. So they would agree with the statement to say that I am God and everything is God. So you might think of that term in terms of pantheistic type notion. Now the Atman is divine, holy, and timeless. So it can be used interchangeably with the first term that we looked here on the PowerPoint today with Brahman. Maya, another concept, is another word that it could resemble what's going on, is illusion. But it also suggests mystery like you might experience in magic. So Hindus, again, believe that nature is Maya, or an illusion. It's got that magic and mystery in it. All right, but at the same time, God is the ruler of Maya, and all beings in the universe are part of his splendor. Now, they do not perceive of things as being permanent or solid, but they constantly recognize that there are shifts and changes that go on in the world and everything. So when someone dies, they certainly would regret that, but yet they don't believe life ends simply at physical death. Now, karma may be one of the most familiar that you probably have heard before, but it comes from the root word of to do. And again, it's been around for a long time. Karma is really the belief that every living thing has its own life force, and this life force does not end at death, but yet it is just reborn into another. And so that may remind you of reincarnation too. So, for example, humans, they've had just all these different life times, and they may have had some as an animal, some as an insect, some as a plant. But there's also higher levels of life that are also available, such as being demigods or superhuman or something on that. Karma might be thought of as the moral law of cause and effect, but every action that we take, every behavior that we take has some type of moral consequence. Good karma means a higher birth. Bad karma means a lower birth. And then you just keep on until you get it right. Samsara is really referring to the wheels of life, but it refers to constant rebirth, and it suggests that the everyday world is full of change, struggle, and suffering. So we've heard of in Western culture, we've heard of the phrase, you only live once, or YOLO. That's not what Hindus mean when they're looking at samsara. Moksha is the ultimate goal. It means freedom or liberation. Now, the root of the word means to be released. So the Upanishads teach that moksha is the ultimate human goal. So it really moves going beyond your selfish needs and wants. It would get rid of being egotistical. It would get rid of resentment and anger. It would be somebody who is fully content. They're able to be kind to all people. But it's really trying to eliminate any type of emotion, desire, or memories, kind of like attachment to this life. Now, again, how do you know that you've achieved moksha? But hey, it is being kind to all is a result of finally getting the insight that is known as moksha. Now, once you get that right, then the pain of rebirth actually ends, according to Hinduism. So, gives us some ideas there, some of those important concepts. Now, part of the system of India has a caste system, and it's their way of ranking people. So in the United States, we have a little bit different way to do it, but caste systems are closed. Once you're born in it, that's it. There's no moving as opposed to the class system where you can. But the caste system also is used in part in India because of the economy that they've had for a long time. And it's also very useful in terms of the religion of Hinduism and how people are ranked. Again, so we've got the PowerPoint is from the high to the low. So there's no higher than the priest or Brahmin, and there's no lower than the untouchable or really Dalit that are listed here in our book. Okay, so some of the people who would be the Brahmin or the priest. The warrior noble is also listed up there. The merchants or the Vaishyas, the Shudra or the peasants, and then the untouchables are the Dalits. The social classes that are used in India are called Varna. That's we've got 5 examples here of Varna up here. And then from there we can divide it into hundreds more, but we're not going to do that. Now, living a good life, according to Hindus, it guarantees a higher caste in the next life. So that was the motivation to do better while you were any of these classes. All right, so the Brahmin, again, are priests, sometimes counselors, but they're at the top, and they would perform the Vedic rituals for the people. The warrior nobles are really the aristocrats, and they have the duty to protect society. The merchants, they would be the ones that include homeowners, moneylenders, and artisans. Sometimes in India, the Hindu belief is they're sometimes called the twice-born. The peasants or Shudra, they perform the manual labor. They serve the higher classes, and sometimes the peasants are referred to as the once-born. And then the lowest of the low that perform the dirtiest work, cleaning toilets and getting up dead animals and things like that, would be the untouchable. Now, Gandhi, that we're familiar with, he referred to the untouchable as the Harijan, or the children of God. And he did that because he wanted them to be included in Indian society in a good way, not to be looked down upon. So talk about Gandhi a little bit more in just a second. All right, may seem strange to talk about yoga, but the last 2 slides really talk about several forms of yoga. So what in the world does yoga have to do with Hinduism? And again, these types of yoga, their original intent was to help people live spiritually. So it's very connected to religion. Yoga actually means union, and it's related to our English words join and yoke. Now, the yogas just suggest a road to perfection. And another word that is sometimes used to describe these yogas, generally speaking, is called margas or paths. So the first one, and I've got just a brief summary on each slide, but Jnana yoga is knowledge yoga, and it's appropriate for priests and intellectuals. It was developed by a school of philosophy called the School of Vedanta, or the Veda End. And that's, again, referring back to the Upanishads that we've talked a little bit earlier today. That tells you just a little bit about them. The Karma Yoga is the action yoga, or the selfless action yoga. But either way, it really points out that when you do things from an unselfish nature, that can lead to a way of perfection. So people who do things without expecting any reward, any money, that's really at the heart of this type of yoga. Bhakti, or devotion yoga, is the type of yoga that forces us to look outward and beyond ourselves to reach another object of affection. So you can, in this type of yoga, use chants, songs, food offerings. You can use statues that are anointed to a spiritual teacher or guru, a familiar word that we've heard, or parents or spouse or whomever it is. But it's this act of one to another, or the devotion. The Raha Yoga, or royal yoga, and I got meditation here on the slide, it's because it does promote meditation. So a mantra is a brief word or phrase that's recited with each breath. Om is an example of a short mantra. Sometimes these things like Om are called the sound of creation, but there are many techniques in meditation called sadhanas, or practices. A yantra is a sacred diagram that's used in this type of yoga. When I click to the last PowerPoint slide, the last two forms of yoga are here. And it mentions Hatha Yoga, or force yoga. And these are really types of physical exercises that were used to make meditation periods easier. So stretching, balancing, and breathing are all examples. You would do this, or these would typically be done for quite a bit of time. The last type of yoga is Kundalini Yoga, and it's a combination of Raha and Hatha Yoga. But here it is talking about there are 7 psychic centers. It's on the PowerPoint, called chakras. And these are basically exist along the spinal column as wheels. And the spiritual energy is called the Kundalini. It's envisioned as a coiled serpent. Kundalini, the word, means she who lies coiled. So that makes it easy to see why a coiled serpent was used. Now, the top energy in this line along the spinal column is called Sahasrara, and it is pictured as a lotus flower. Now, that comes to the end of our slides, but I did want to briefly mention a few other things that are in the chapter. One talks about the stages of life. That's somewhere kind of near the caste system in the book. But it talks about each stage of life to the Hindu has a proper way of being lived. And so it focuses on the student, the householder, the retiree, and the renunciate. And let me just spend a moment on the renunciant. But the last stage in the life cycle is only after retirement. So somebody who reaches that, they can decide to live entirely free from society on their own, permitted to leave and just live as a hermit. And really they call that an ashram, living in a cave. But it's done, simply to spend more time on religious type activities and studying. But it is done to hasten your insight and obtain moksha that we had mentioned earlier. Now, I just skipped to the last stage because I thought that was kind of unique. There's many that we have that we may already know a little bit about in the United States. We started looking at one of the pictures there of Ganesha. That was one of the Hindu gods, and there were a few others that I wanted to quickly show you a picture of. But There's a term in our book called the Trimurti, and that is short for triple form, but it looks at 3 Hindu gods that are fairly important: Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. But they are considered the forces of creation, preservation, and destruction. So Brahma is with creation, Vishnu is with preservation, and then Shiva is with destruction. Now, a lot of these may have interesting looks and descriptions and colors, and sometimes accompanied by an animal, but Brahma is usually pictured as an ancient, thoughtful king sitting on a throne. He has 4 faces to look in 4 directions. He has 8 arms, and each of those holding symbols of power. He is usually accompanied by a white goose. Vishnu represents preservation, but he seems to be associated with the sun. 75% of Hindus know who he is and try to worship him. And he usually appears as a tall figure that has a crown and it has a regal type manner to him. He has 4 arms and holds symbols of power too, but is accompanied by an eagle whose name is Garuda. So he is also associated with loving kindness. Shiva, I think I've got a picture here. Let me pull that up. There's a poster from a website. I think you can buy this from Amazon, but at any rate, it shows you Shiva. It's good to have some examples of some of these things. Our book does, but I pulled up another. But this god is linked with destruction and actually is sitting in type of a yoga position. So, it could be that Shiva has derived from some other gods over the years. But that's interesting too. Now you can see that there's a drum to the right of this picture, or it looks like that. But the drum symbolizes creation in the beginning of time. Usually there's a flame, but a flame represents that destruction, again, of which he would be responsible for. And just interesting kind of picture to look at. Now the animal that accompanies Shiva is a bull, and the bull has the name of Nandi the bull. All right, but Shiva and Ganesha are usually found in temples, so those are interesting. I had a couple others I wanted to show you. One is really showing the input of females when it comes to these gods. So here is Devi, and also known as a goddess, but is the Great Mother, and is worshipped throughout India here. And there's a picture, but she can be loving and cruel. She is harsh to those who show themselves unworthy of her love. A couple others that I wanted to show you there. Again, these are female and some of the most popular. Durga is one, so she looks interesting there. Again, many arms and all the different symbols that are in her arms. And most of these things she has that she's carrying are used to destroy evil. So usually wearing a crown or has a halo. In this picture, she has a crown. And in our book, we have a picture of her as well. And then the last one I wanted to show you was Kali. And this one actually looks a little more fear-provoking, kind of scary there, because she's got a necklace of human skulls and then fanged teeth that seem to be dripping with blood. And in this picture, looks like, again, has had some battles with people that lost to her. So the whole point is there is quite an impact of the feminine when it comes to the Hindu gods. Now, we mentioned earlier about the guru, and that's just a spiritual master, but that's where that comes, is from Hindu. But a guru is the one who removes darkness, and it's usually a person. Another word that you can use is grave or weighty, but it shows the importance of their spiritual contribution to those who are trying to learn and need some help. Now, most of the gurus are men, but they also can be women. And this is when, you find a guru, they may live in a compound together. That's the ashram that I think I had mentioned earlier. So it is common when you have a guru to touch or kiss the feet, and that is seen as an act of reverence. But the guru is supposed to help other people in their pursuit of these worthwhile goals that they want to pursue. Another interesting point about Hinduism is it's very kind to animals. That makes it very unique in world religions. So a devout Hindu, one who is serious about Hinduism, would not kill or eat animals. And as you've seen, some of the gods that we've looked at in the book and some of the pictures, they either have an animal companion or they have animal features. So that is really kind of interesting there. And perhaps this is because of reincarnation that animals are seen in such a high regard. But cows, bulls, and other animals, they either have a significant role in religious matters, or they were symbols of fertility, or they had economic value. And so that may explain why they are really seen so way. Now, near the end of the chapter, the book has and I think it does this repeatedly, but it has a section on how the arts are used in these different religions. And so there's quite a interesting section on how symbols are used in Hindu temples. And again, they're important. They show meaning. It's not to be secular, but to really kind of bring out their religion. Some of the challenges that Hinduism faces. Now, that's, again, another section in our book near the end of it. Hinduism has experienced some conflict with other nations that are close to it. And really, there's a dispute between sometimes Hinduism and those who follow Islam. And our book gives us a little historical context for that. There's a challenge, or was a challenge, to India due to British rule, and that ended in 1947, but that certainly was a source of challenge to many Hindus for a long time. European values have also penetrated India. That's a modern challenge that can affect their religion. We also talked about Gandhi, and our book has interesting page or two about him and his life, and how his goal of nonviolence was used, and that really led to the independence of India from Britain. And he influenced lots of people, and one of those was Martin Luther King in the United States for his civil rights movement action in the 1960s that really has improved life for many African Americans in the United States, some 50 to almost 60 years later. Okay, so those are some issues there that our book picks up. Now, a few last issues for the here and now that might impact Hinduism is about the caste system. That seems to be weakening, although it's been in effect in India for a long, long time. The roles of women is a contemporary issue. Getting more equality there so they can become gurus instead of being subservient and having a lesser role. That's something interesting there. Child marriage is a third contemporary issue in India, and so that doesn't usually lead to a very good outcome for the female children that it affects. And then fourth, one that you've probably heard of before, is male children are valued more heavily than females, and so a lot of times female children were killed in infancy so that the males would be preserved, but that is changing too. Okay, so I think that is to be of some help to you, and you're looking at the chapter and reading and trying to break that information down. I hope it has been helpful. I hope you have a good day. If there's something I can do to help you, please contact me, and I'll see you next time.